Hello and welcome to this introductory video on Fission. Fission is a serverless platform which runs on top of Kubernetes. It gives you a function as a service kind of model to interact with applications and deal with workloads. It uses SCADA project pretty heavily for integrations with various message queues and event sources. Now, as a developer, you can write functions or microservices in any language on Fission, whether it be Java, Golang, Node.js, or Ruby, or even PHP, Python. And as a developer, you can write either functions or you can write simple microservices. You can give it source code or you can even give it a Docker image and it can run and manage it for you. Now, once you're deployed, any of these workloads onto Fission, there is definitely, you want a way to call those functions either using HTTP or using cron, maybe at a, certain frequency, or using some sort of message queue triggers. And Fission supports a whole bunch of message queue triggers today. So for example, today we have support for NATs, Amazon Kinesis, Amazon SQS, Redis, Kafka, for example, and there are more integrations being added by the community. Now, when you have a complex platform like this, you also want detailed observability. So Fission does integrate with Elastic and Prometheus and Jaeger and Grafana to give you a complete details into what is happening in your platform. Now, let's go and install Fission in a Kubernetes cluster. Let's deploy our first function. Let's look at what does that look like. So this is the documentation page that you can see, and we are going to use the Helm command to actually install Fission onto a Kubernetes cluster. I'm just going to replace the name of the namespace there from a variable to actual value. And let me flip the screen to the terminal here. Great. So I'm already connected to a Kubernetes cluster, as you can see, and I have a few namespaces already created, including the one for Fission. And I'm using a DigitalOcean's Kubernetes cluster. And what I'm going to do is install Fission here. So as you can see, I'm using the 1.12.0 version of Fission, but you could be using the most latest version that is available, on the website or in the GitHub releases. Now we can go ahead and watch the pods as they're getting created. Now this installation will take probably a minute or so to finish, and then we can see all the pods in running state more or less. Great. So here is Fission installed onto a Kubernetes cluster. Now if you want to create a simple function and try it out, we can right away go ahead with that. So let's create an environment. So environment is nothing but a runtime base for your function or workload basically. I'm going to create function now, and instead of actually downloading the code, I'm going to simply point to the GitHub URL that is in the previous line here. So that will download the file, create a package out of it, and then create also a function out of it. And finally, we can simply test the function. Now this function is very simple, as you can see, and it just does an hello world. So let's go and look at the source code of what this hello.js function is doing. Oops, I copied the command and not the URL. Let me copy the URL, please. All right. So hello.js is nothing but a simple hello world function written in Node.js, and it follows a certain format of the functions, as you can see. Now, if you go back and look at the various components that are installed as part of the Fission installation, you will notice that we have a few components which are Fission specific. For example, builder, manager, controller, executor, and then there is router and storage service and timer. And there are a few components installed from Prometheus chart for monitoring and stuff like that. Mainly, we also install the NATs messaging queue along with the NATs integration, but you can also install other integrations, for example, Kafka and a bunch of others. Now, this is one way we created the function, which was using CLI, but this is not always desirable. And you might want to use specs so that you can store them in a source code and actually push it out from the source code. So let's go and look at a sample function spec. Now, as you can see here, instead of defining the function on the CLI, we can actually define them in a proper a custom resource, Kubernetes templates. And so here we see the function, there is package, there is archive, and then there is also environment. And what you need to do with these kind of functions is simply do fission spec apply, and the whole desired states gets created into the cluster. Now those are just two ways of creating different functions. Now let's go and look at our original presentation. Now we looked at various components, onto the installed Fission cluster. There was controller, executor, router, storage service. So controller and router are what the front end of the Fission in terms of API and routing. Executor actually takes care of executing the requests as they come in. The storage service is used for storing your source code into either S3 bucket or into a persistent volume. And then there is a couple of other components like KubeWatcher and Timer, which allow you to watch Kubernetes events and then do invocations on a timely basis, respectively. Now, if you look at the repositories, there are main three repositories. In the Fission organization, there is Fission core, which has the core source code of the Fission. There's environments where all the environments like Node.js or Golang or JVM kind of reside. You can also custom build your own environments on top of those. And then there is KEDA connectors. So KEDA connectors are primarily used for invoking functions when there is a message in the message queue, and those connectors are actually pretty generic. You could use them irrespective of Fission. For example, if a message arrives in a message queue, you can call an HTTP endpoint and provide all those things as environment variables to those connectors. Now this is a very brief overview of Fission. There are two more videos which slightly go in more detail. The first video is as part of the GitHub Satellite 2021. It goes into details of what faas is, what it does, and what it doesn't, and it gives you a very simple demo of a Kafka queue. The second video is slightly more detailed. It goes into what environment is, what a package is, what a function is, and builds up the whole thing into an architecture of how Fission actually runs. The links for these two videos you'll also find in the show notes. So I recommend you go and check them out. Thank you very much.